I passed your test. Fate has a twisted sense of humor, it seems. I suppose you think I'm some sort of monster. More so since I survived your ritual. You keep striking at me, and I just refuse to die decently. Ah, now there's the venom I expected. Well, is that it? Surely you've more to say to me than that. Go on, try out all the curses and insults you know. I'll teach you some new ones if they don't suffice. And now what? Am I to be some trophy of your victory? The defeated enemy you drag about on a leash wherever you go? Or have you some worse fate in mind for me? Or what? You'll kill me? Go ahead. The joining was my death sentence anyway. It's hardly my fault that it failed to produce the desired result, Warden. Indeed, I'd almost forgotten that. Thank you for the reminder. I think it's time we got to the point here. What do you want from me? My execution was all but arranged. If you'd wanted me dead, you could have had your wish at the lands meet. I assume, then, that you have something else in mind. That's the harsher punishment, certainly, and I can hardly argue that it's more than I deserve. I suppose I ought to be grateful. I have at least some chance now of putting right some of the things I have done. Despite what we each wanted, we're both here now facing the same enemy, and we can be of use to one another, however little we may enjoy that fact. Very well. It'll give me an excellent vantage point to see if you can actually lead an attack against the Blight. We should speak no more of this at present. Time's wasting. Did you want something? Hate doesn't describe it. I've seen painted, masked lords beat an old farmer to death with riding crops to the... I saw good, sensible men fight armored chevaliers with nothing. No weapons, no armies, not even hope of success to see the occupation end. The past is always with us. It's in our bones and our blood, and we wear it on our skin. You can think otherwise, but you'll never get far without it. No, it doesn't. I failed. Lives were in my hands, and I failed. Nothing excuses that. In any case, there's no use discussing this. We have much work left to do. Very well, then. He was my friend. If he'd wanted to conquer the Fade, I would have led the charge. I was hunting, well, poaching, to be entirely honest, when a boy... He was so dirty, you'd have thought he'd been dug up out of the ground. The traitorous bootlickers who'd just murdered the Queen. Though I didn't know it at the time. He was bloody, exhausted, and obviously being hunted. I offered to take him to my father's camp. That's a story for another time, I'm afraid. I've gone on too long as it is. There are men who inspire such devotion that everyone around would lay down their lives for him. And what makes them so? Your guess is as good as mine. Merrick was remarkable. He nearly did. Merrick was never one to avoid his duty. And given his preference, he would have acknowledged his son no matter the circumstance. But he had more than his honor to think of. It would have ruined Rowan, after all. She'd be reduced to a concubine in the eyes of our neighbors and put Kaelin's status as heir in question. So Merrick made the hard choice. Eamon offered to raise the boy, and that was that. I was turned by then, and a general. You can buy respect through birth or by bloodshed, I've found. But we've been idle long enough. We should get moving. Very well, then. I suppose that depends on how much of the kingdom was left by then. Once the border was secure, the army would have regrouped to push back the Darkspawn in the south. We couldn't, especially after Ostagar. It wasn't an ideal plan, but it seemed necessary at the time. It's easy to say now. When Chevaliers were massing on our doorstep, things were a little less clear. There was never any question in my mind that Honora would remain on the throne. After all, who else was there? Maric had no brothers or sisters. Most of the Therans were publicly hung by Megran when he took power. Very well, then. Honora always did have a flair for the dramatic. She could have been a bard. It's a foolish question. I'm sure you think me capable of every sort of evil, but Honora is my only child. Well, I'm sure having you come to her rescue gave Honora no small amount of pleasure. Is that a serious question? Is there someone else you know of who could stand up to the Landsmeet? Believe what you like, it makes no difference to me. Very well, then. So far as anyone could tell, she was the undisputed monarch. She'd fall, skin her knees, and command them to stop stinging. It may have worked, too. She bleeds just like anyone. Or are you surprised that my daughter ever fell down? If you're expecting some particular insight into my daughter's character, I'm afraid I'm probably not the best source. I'm hardly impartial. You already know the answer to that. Politics. I think you already know the answer to that. Guaran sits in between the Brazilian forest and the sea. It's far from the old Tevinter roads. The village by our keep was never even as big as Redcliffe. There are always a few children around. Charcoal burners, sons and daughters mostly, but Honora never joined them. Kalen. He was a bit younger than she was, but Honora would lead him about the palace like a puppy on a leash, deep in adventures together. I believe the two of them once fought an army of ogres in the wine cellar. That was their explanation for all the broken bottles, anyway. Because it was vacant, and though it's off the trade routes close to Denerim, it was a good place for children to grow up. Solitude isn't terrible, you know. She had a free reign over the woods. But this is not really the time or place to discuss my daughter. We have work to do. Very well, then. Of course. Did you want something? Of course. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised at your success. You beat me. Perhaps you can do this after all. It hardly matters now. I've certainly been mistaken about you before. Do you want something? I suppose I have a moment. Eamon is a shrewd man. He'll be advising the boy. They'll do all right, I suppose. He had no education in governing, politics, or diplomacy. And though I know you don't wish to hear this, he doesn't strike me as a talented amateur. Your friend may get good advice from Eamon, but he's weak. All the bands know it. You can see them. A pack of wild dogs waiting for a bone. The first chance they get, they'll pry concessions out of him. They'll pick at the throne until it's only a gilded chair with no power or authority at all. Honora, as you may have already noticed, is clever enough to manipulate the bands. She can make alliances and play them against one another to get what she wants. This discussion profits no one. I may be wrong. I will certainly hope so. Of course. Thanks. Do you want something? I suppose I have a... Nora is a good queen. She has been for 5 years now. Whatever she might think, I never took power from Honora. She may have felt threatened, but I most pointedly did not remove her from the throne. In all seriousness, Honora is formidable. You should know that by now. I'm not a seer. If I could predict the future, I wouldn't be here now. Honora is strong enough to endure. She may make a few mistakes along the way, but she'll survive them. But this isn't the time to discuss such things. By all means. Of course. Thanks. Do you want something? Of course. Thanks. Do you want something? Of course. Thanks. 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 Do you want something? I suppose I have a moment. Of course.